She's sometimes sad, she's sometimes happy. She's doing things to make her life less crappy. Trying a treatment that's new on the scene. Let's sit back and talk about ketamine.
Hey everybody, welcome to the final episode of Season 1 of Ketamine Insights. We're very happy that you're here with us. We're going to talk today about cognitive distortions, which are basically inaccurate habits of thinking, or you can think of them as like inaccurate thought patterns that we all have to some degree. Today, we're going to focus on one cognitive distortion in particular, which is all or nothing thinking. It's also called black and white thinking. This kind of thinking can be particularly common among people like me with mental illness, but you also see it everywhere. Like in American culture, we see it in our politics. We see it in the way we judge each other, especially online. And we often see it in the way we judge ourselves and the way we evaluate our impact on the world. And this episode veers into a discussion of that last one, the question of service and impact on the world. So I just want to provide some context, which is that Lynn and I both built our careers around service to others. In fact, we met in 2011 as colleagues doing that kind of work, and that flavors this conversation. We end up talking a bit about how easy it is to slip into the all or nothing either or type mindset when thinking about our own well-being and our impact on the world. And this is it's just a really difficult topic and an intricate topic. And it's one that I'm kind of obsessed with. I don't think we could ever do it justice in such a short conversation, but I do think it's an important conversation to have. So to go back to treatment-resistant depression, chronic illness, and disability, people like me come up against all or nothing thinking all the time. For example, one of the things we talk about in this episode is that we have to manage our expectations around how much we can heal or feel better and on what timeline. And this is clearer for some illnesses than others. Like with serious depression, it is often really unclear how much better a given patient can expect to feel or when. So for me, I've struggled for years to walk the line between two things that at first seem like opposites, acceptance and fighting, or acceptance and vigilance. And by this, I mean on the one hand, accepting my situation, accepting the pain, whether it's psychic or physical, accepting the loss of a lot of my abilities, the loss of the person I was in a lot of ways, versus being vigilant and fighting to end that pain and fighting to regain my abilities. For me, I eventually realized that this is not a situation that is all one thing or all the opposite. I actually have to do both. And in fact, I already was doing both. I have to accept my current level of suffering while working hard to improve my mental health, because it turns out that these things are not either or at all. But when we are able to do any measure of acceptance, we often come up against other people's all or nothing thinking. So I've had the experience, for example, of trying to explain to others that a cure may not be a reasonable goal for me, and having them say shit like, oh no, don't ever give up, which is really, really hurtful. So this is another reminder to be like Dr. Paul Farmer. Try to be generous in your interpretations of other people's actions. And when in doubt, be curious. And with that, here is our episode on all or nothing thinking. This is the all or nothing episode. I am your host, your co-host, Molly.
And I'm your co-host, Lynn.
So today we're talking about the temptation to think about things as being all one thing or all another. So this is called black and white thinking, or all or nothing thinking. And the way it applies in our topic here is thinking that something will either cure you entirely or that it's a complete failure. And I think I bring this up with ketamine because a lot of people come in, like it's been in the press as like a miracle cure for depression. You've probably read articles like that, Lynn, where it's like, don't worry, ketamine exists. It's very, it's more helpful than anything on the market right now, as far as like, has a higher success rate so far than any antidepressant that you can take in pill form. But that doesn't mean that it's going to cure everybody or, going to help everybody. Even it helps most people, but there's a difference between a good thing and a cure. And I guess like I'm just trying to say in this episode, like, be happy for the good things, even if they're not cures entirely, which is the role that ketamine has played for me personally.
Oh, that's great. And I would just say, I think like a lot of medications in general, or even different kinds of treatments and therapies often can be seen as like all or nothing, right? And people or companies or therapists can say that these are the miracle cures and this is what's going to do it. And I think besides just ketamine, other psychedelics over the last couple of years, I've seen a lot of press around them as like the cures for different types of conditions, whether it's like PTSD for veterans or for addictions or depression. And I mean, it's great that they're getting this attention and so much progress has been made. But it's really important to acknowledge this and your experience that it's not a cure-all, that you made significant progress, but it's not, it's not for everyone. Like, okay, do this ketamine or another type of psychedelic for treating depression or another issue, and you're going to be cured or you're not. It's it's not that simple. It's not a black and white thing,
right? And I think like a big point of this conversation in general is like to manage your expectations, and to set yourself up to be like, to be happy with a 10% increase in your mood, a 30%, a 40%, whatever it is. Like that's progress. And a lot of the time, like you're saying, there's no one thing that's going to cure you. You have to try. And you also have to you have to not just try, but implement several different, maybe you do have to exercise more. Maybe you also have to be on a different medication, and
practicing
ketamine is one of the
stop drinking,
right?
And it's the pie chart of different things you should be doing.
Totally,
you have to figure that
and
out.
Whatever works for you, like continue to do it, even if it doesn't feel like a cure. So, I think the all or nothing thinking is one of the it is one of the long list, longish, maybe there's 15 or so recognized cognitive distortions. That if anybody has been in therapy, and in particular, I think cognitive behavioral therapy is where the term comes from. And it's really helpful. I find it I've had friends call me because I talk about depression all the time. Whenever anybody knows anybody that's going through something, they often call me. I'll really recommend just Googling the term cognitive distortions, because it helps you realize that you're not the only one thinking weird. Yeah. You're not the only one that thinks it's a problem. In fact, it's so shitty that people have dedicated themselves to trying to make it better. You know what I mean? That's always helpful. Okay. In my mind, is to be oh, not only are other people suffering from this, but other people are trying to help us. Yeah.
Cognitive distortions.
So the idea of
I'm gonna Google it.
Cognitive distortion is they're all very common. All of us are in the habit of thinking irrationally about certain things or in certain ways, but some of us just do it more often than others. Some of us do it in more destructive ways than others. There are people who think they have cognitive distortions that make them feel better about themselves, and that can be great for them and sometimes make them annoying to be around. But anyway, I'll list a couple cognitive distortions here. There's one that a lot of depressed people tend to have is disqualifying the positive. So that's to say sure, this one thing went well, it just happened, but that was only luck, and the next thing is sure to go bad. Like we've all felt that way, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, totally.
And then someone looks at you and goes, you just won the lottery. Like, what are you sad about?
Yeah.
You know? And you're like, but I'm not going to win it next time. That kind of thing. I got this promotion, but I barely deserved it. And there's not as much money involved.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay. But another one is personalization, which is taking responsibility for things that are outside of your control. So taking things personally. A lot of people suffer from this during grief. They think somehow it's their fault if they had only, or even if it's not their fault, they just wish that they had said something different before the person passed, that kind of thing.
Like if only you had done, if only you had a chance to do this, or if you'd called and said this, or
Yeah. And it's like the truth of the matter is in most cases you didn't know what was about to happen. It's not your fault that you know, that's something that can be really, you know, just it creates a lot of suffering. You know, when you think things are your fault, especially things that are outside of your control entirely. Another example is like magical thinking, which is to say, like, you know, kind of making illogical leaps, like, oh, if I try really hard, nothing bad will ever happen, which is like, I think very common in America. Like we believe we live in a meritocracy.
Yeah, totally. Or, I had a friend once in high school who was like, I believe in karma. And she wasn't like a Buddhist or anything, but, or, you know, she was just like, I believe in karma, you know, and I've been working really hard and doing a lot of good things. And so, and, you know, a lot of crappy things have happened to me. So I've got good coming to me, you know. I'm just like, like,
exactly.
Yeah, I don't think that's how it works, you know. It's not.
And the thing that is bothersome to me about that is like, so what do you think of people to whom bad things do happen?
Yeah, like they've been really awful to people, and they deserved that. They deserve that. That's their karma.
Right.
That's not fair. That's not fair at all. Yeah.
Right. Surely they did something to deserve it. It's like, oh, have you ever loved someone who was suffering?
Exactly.
Because you probably actually have, like, for sure.
Yep.
So that's magical thinking. And then catastrophizing is just, you know, turning things into a disaster.
I know about this. I have someone in my life who catastrophizes. And I know about this because then I have someone in my life who is a therapist and taught me. I didn't know about cognitive distortions, but I knew about catastrophizing specifically. And oh my gosh, it's really useful. And once you know the term and you kind of understand it, you're like, wait a minute. I think you're catastrophizing. Yeah, like you're taking this one thing and you're turning it into a disaster, a catastrophe, and maybe it'll go this direction, but let's not turn this into a catastrophe. Every time something negative starts to happen or could potentially happen, you know.
Right, and I think for me, realize like going through this list and being like, oh shit, I do this one, I don't really do that one, I do this one. It helps you like get some perspective on your own thought patterns.
Yeah, totally.
And you kind of see easier, like, what are your bad mental habits?
Yeah, I know. And this person, I think now that they're aware that they do this, they're like, oh, I think I'm catastrophizing again. And like, and that's helpful, right? So that it's not like, oh, this is real. No, this is real. This is going to happen. It's like, I think I'm catastrophizing. And like to catch yourself, that's probably really useful. You know, that's an insight.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't reality. This is really catastrophizing. Helpful.
It can help, it can help you ground yourself. Yeah. I think catastrophizing in particular, like, happens a lot to people who have anxiety.
Yeah.
You know, you worry and you think, oh, what's the worst possible thing that can happen? And I think a lot of, like, I've heard therapists recommend, like, spend just a minute imagining a good outcome. And like,
I like that. Yeah.
And it doesn't all, like, that might not stick, but at least you, like, you know.
Let your mind go there.
You're not always, let your mind go there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Back to like kind of the all or nothing thinking idea. I would say, like, no matter how long or how severe a depressive episode is, it's still important to realize that, like, being depressed doesn't mean that your life won't be meaningful.
Of course.
Doesn't mean, like, even for that, like, if it's a 3-month long depression, there are better moments within those 3 months. There will be moments of joy, you know, even for me, you know, with very serious lifelong depression. Like, I don't just similar to like any chronic illness or any illness, really, it's like there are, it's not all one thing. It's not all devastation and gloom and doom necessarily. And there are ways to like build a meaningful life, even with severe illness, whether that's depression or schizophrenia or, you know, all kinds of different illnesses that people end up having. And like I said earlier, the thing about this whole conversation, the point is just to like keep your expectations realistic. And like when I was told, you know, when I started ketamine, I was told it would probably, chances were good that it would cure me within 4 sessions. So after a lifetime of depression, I thought like, oh, in a month I'll be better.
Of course. Yeah.
And like, that was
so excited.
Didn't have to be that way, right?
So you wish you had tempered your expectations a little bit.
Exactly. I thought that, you know, when session 3 and 4 were coming and going, and I felt better but not perfect. Instead of being glad I was better, I felt disappointed that I wasn't perfect.
That's a bummer.
And yeah, it just didn't. That was just because of the expectations. It didn't have. Had I not had those unrealistic expectations, it wouldn't have been so devastating.
Yeah.
And that's a hit, right? Like you're trying to improve your mood.
So then you're disappointed. So then you're,
exactly.
your mood
it's
goes
a
down.
hit to your mood.
Yeah. Maybe it's bad karma, Molly. What did you do?
It's bad karma. The thing is that I once like accidentally.
Maybe it was in a previous life.
Tail, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What can you do?
And the truth of the matter was that like that medication had helped me more than anything else ever had. So the disappointment was a real, like, it was really avoidable, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you had not been thinking like, okay, by this 4th session, I'm going to be feeling perfect. If you had just been hoping that you'll feel better as you were, then you would have avoided the disappointment and you just would have been happy with the fact that you were feeling significantly better. Right. So if it hadn't been for the all or nothing thinking,
super grateful.
Yeah, you would have just been feeling good because you were feeling good.
Yeah.
You were feeling good, but disappointed, which worsened your mood. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Right.
Okay.
Good, but disappointed. It's like, son of a bitch, really?
Yeah. I can imagine. Okay. So this is important. This is an important point for listeners, right?
I think so. I mean,
it's huge.
I don't know. I guess it is worth putting in a word about like acceptance versus vigilance when it comes to most illnesses that last a while. Like if you have a cold, I don't know, and it lasts 3 days and you're angry about it, like that's not going to ruin your month even. Yeah. But if you have a longer term illness and you also are angry about it, it is going to make it harder. In my experience,
absolutely.
Having watched people and having felt a lot of, you know, anger and frustration. At the same time, like some people don't want to let go of that anger because they feel like it's motivating
to fight it, find a cure.
Yeah. Better. And in a lot of cases it can be motivating. So the idea of like, you know, a lot of people who like study mindfulness or try to practice mindfulness, like do have this like dichotomy, especially people who like are engaged in social justice or, you know, see problems with the world that they want to participate in fixing or helping to fix. The idea that you can accept something feels counterintuitive. It feels very like condoning things that you don't want to be true.
Yep.
Right? Like, have you ever felt that way, Lynn?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like what is it we can accept? I know I've been thinking about this, like the Serenity Prayer, you know, and that it's been actually playing in my head a lot. I've been thinking about it. Like it's like an echo chamber in my head about, you know, the Serenity Prayer is what, like God grant me remind me what it is,
the strength to change the things I can
and accept the things I can't.
And the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
Something
like that. It's more or less like that, but basically to try to change the things you can and just accept that what you can't. I've been thinking about that and like, who decides what we can't change, what we can and can't change? Like, how is that decision made exactly? And this has been running through my head. About like, what is it that we have to accept and what can and can't we change? How is this
It's
decided?
I feel like for most people, it's a lifelong conversation with themselves.
Absolutely.
Right? And hopefully you have people in your life who you can have this conversation outside of just, I feel the exact same way. I've had that conversation in my head for, I don't know, years. And the like a lot of, so I was studying not Alcoholics Anonymous, but the Al-Anon, which is for family members. And one of the things that they say is a lot of people who are young, like if you grow up around a lot of alcohol, you often take responsibility for things later in life that are not under your control.
Okay.
So similar to one of the cognitive distortions we were just talking about earlier. And I think like that serenity prayer question is very important for people like that who tend to take responsibility or tend to say like things are wrong in the world. You could do two things about it. You can like it or you can change it. It's like, well, I remember thinking that. I remember thinking like, okay, if I don't like it, I got to work to change it. And it's like, it's too big of a task. It's too big of a task.
In terms of like a social justice kind of thinking. Yeah. Well, that's the other thing too, is it's like so overwhelming. And that's why often people that work in social justice, you can become overwhelmed and it like, and some of us that, we can all become so overwhelmed in so many ways, right? By how daunting it all is. But we do all have to continue the good fight in some way and on some level. And some of us have maybe more strength and energy to put toward it than others do,
And it's important, right? To prioritize rest when it comes to these things, like to play the long game, because these problems are long term. Whether it is like treatment resistant depression or, social injustice all over the world, like in your own country or somewhere else.
That's right. That's right. And we all have a fight we're fighting. We all usually have multiple fights we're fighting. And
simultaneously.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. And it aligns with that idea of like all or nothing thinking really well, right? Where it's like making a tiny difference is not nothing. It might not be everything, but it's not nothing either.
Yeah, that is important. Absolutely. But there's a lot of interesting stuff that's happening. And my work is international, and I'm very passionate about that, and social justice and equity and an international level.
I think a lot of this like is really important in therapists' lives too, right? Like anybody who kind of tries to do good in their job has to battle with this.
Yeah. Well, and it's like what scale are you making a difference at? And like, it's so hard. I don't know. Yeah, this is a whole other interesting conversation. No,
it is.
Right?
Yeah, I feel like we could do not just one episode, but
God.
an entire
and
whole podcast.
I know. And David sometimes talks about what is the like what should be make like the evidence says that you should be make like the best you can make the greatest impact by like giving money directly to like the poorest people in the world, right? But I'm like, does that mean you're not making an impact by like giving money directly to like this like a homeless person in America, or like supporting some other cause, like an abortion clinic, there's so many things. Like, what does that really mean to like the greatest like you define the impact? I mean, I don't know, right?
I think like the and also like when you're thinking about your own time more than your money, like your own time, it is, in my experience, helpful to think about like not just the greatest good that can be done, but like what's the good that you fit best with.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
Because it's really hard to like shape yourself into the person who, if you're an artist and you're trying to like be an economist, it's just a rough life.
Yeah, or vice versa.
And you might end up, you might end up getting like super depressed, honest to God. Like that's not far from what my story is.
Yeah.
Like like the wisdom to know the difference between the things you can change and the things you can't, I think is a really, like, that's a really valuable nugget that like we all, the conversation, I feel like the conversation is really valuable.
Yeah.
And also I was really grateful to hear about do you know what the NAP ministry is?
Mm-mm.
There's this woman, I only heard about her. A friend of mine was like, oh yeah, there's this Instagram account called the Nap Ministry.
Okay.
I really recommend it. It's about
up.
like how sacred rest is.
Oh, okay.
Especially
like
for
the nap,
people
like
of color,
literally the
especially
nap
for
ministry. Okay.
literally napping.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
That
about
was like
napping.
an acronym.
And she does
Okay.
these public events where people nap
Nice.
in public places.
Okay.
And it's about like, you know, the value of rest.
I love it.
And how rest, especially for like oppressed people, can
Yeah.
be a revolutionary act.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Okay.
I really love her work. And I think like the thing that aligns well with what you were saying about like international
Yeah.
work and international equity is like, it's important. It's been very, very valuable for me
Yeah.
in this conversation about like acceptance versus fighting, like vigilance versus rest, is to zoom out and say like, as a person with lifelong, like pretty serious depression, I wasn't dealt the best hand, like fair enough, right? But I know for a fact that I wasn't dealt the worst by any stretch of the imagination, not even close. It is very easy. My partner also has a disability, and we've both kind of shared stories laughingly with each other about how people are so quick to give up on us, like friends, you know, like clerks at stores, like physicians you meet for the first time, be like, wait, you can't see well? How did you get here?
God.
How will you get home? As if you just now became blind.
Yeah.
You know?
Can't
and
can't
they're
get
devastated
anywhere.
by the concept.
Oh,
and it's
no.
like, I've had some time, you know, I've figured
Yeah.
out how to
Yeah.
navigate as best I can. Like, don't, are you okay?
Yeah.
Like, I'm fine. How are you,
Yeah.
doc? Like,
Yeah.
and it's important just to keep that in mind that like, you know, the things that you might think are insufferable actually are not.
Yeah.
They're really not.
That is a good point.
So,
and I think that is so important, and keeping it all in perspective, and the global perspective is so important. And having lived in some of the countries that have some of the most extreme levels of poverty in the world, I know that, and I've seen that. I know you have too. And yeah, it's important. I also think we have to remember that that the things that we do suffer, as privileged as most of us, as we are, and most of us listening to this podcast are, we have to also, I think it's good to keep that in perspective, but then also remember that like we still do suffer, you know, as like with the things that we go through, we still are suffering, and it's still valid. Right. And we have to validate ourselves and validate one another. Yeah. Yeah.
I really liked what Paul Farmer used to say about this, that like that illness, especially, but all kinds of suffering like tends to happen along gradients.
Oh, okay.
So, and actually Robert Sapolsky, who you and I have talked about in the past, has really interesting things to say about this too. He's got a great Ezra Klein interview about this, where it's like, we don't understand suffering on a global level.
Yeah.
We don't even understand it on like a city level. You look at your neighbors.
Yeah.
And like, that's true of other primates as well. Like their stress hormones go up when everybody around them is doing better than them. And they're not looking at the like next troop over. They're looking at their own troop, and that's it.
Can I just say that I'm devastated that Paul Farmer died so suddenly and unexpectedly and decades too early. What a loss.
Yeah. Early 60s.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your story and the important message of all or nothing. I think it is huge. And I will just share, you know, something like one way that I can empathize a bit is that, you know, I do suffer from chronic migraine. I've really only been dealing with it for a couple of years that it's been truly chronic. It started up in like summer of 2020, and I just had a bit before that. And I would say, so I feel like I understand to an extent. It doesn't affect me anymore because of medications and lifestyle changes and different things that I've discovered over the last couple of years. I'm not completely laid out like I was a couple of years ago or even a year and a half ago. But I kind of understand some of what you're, so I don't understand exactly what you're saying, because it's not the same as depression, but the sort of idea of like a chronic illness and something that affects you on a daily basis and having to accept versus fight, and like, I do understand that, and having tried some different medications also, and having some that sort of wear off over time, and like dealing with that disappointment and kind of like, do I try something else, or do I just accept that this isn't going to be a 100% cure? But like most people aren't 100% cured. Like most people have chronic migraine. They might still have 5 migraine days a month or 15 migraine days a month, or at least 2. And so I'm lucky if I just have a handful, and coming to that realization, it's like, well, this is what I live with, and this is just a chronic illness. And actually, I can find ways to just manage this. I have my ice packs, and I sleep a little more than I used to, and I maybe don't have do as much intense exercise as I used to. And I just have my lifestyle has changed, in many different ways, some small and some big. And I accept that. For the most part. And I'm really glad it's not nearly as bad as it was 2 years ago. I've made a lot of changes since then. But I've, medical and otherwise, but I'm not like, I'm not, oh, I'm cured. It's not over. And when people ask me about it, like, oh, are your headaches or your migraines gone? Or are they? I'm like, no, but I'm managing. I'm not debilitated. I am sometimes, but I'm not debilitated all the time. Right. But I'm managing, which is great.
I think my therapist told me that I didn't know before that at all, was that like a lot of people who are, especially in the social justice world, hit a wall around 30.
Oh, interesting.
And it is because your body starts to process stress very differently in your 30s. And so that stress that was like motivating and like exciting and thrilling in your 20s becomes like it starts to wear you down as opposed to like kind of lift you up.
Interesting.
I know it can also be destructive in your 20s, but like in your 30s it can really take a toll on your mental health and on your physical well-being. And he said like it's you can kind of expect that every decade of your life, and you have to adapt to it. You have to accommodate it, or it can be bad, and it's fine to accommodate it. Like that's what learning and growth is. But it's when you don't accept change that it can really hurt.
Well, that's really interesting, and that's really good to know. I thought that was helpful. It's super helpful.
That should come, like, you should learn that in grade school.
And I feel like we should be learning about that, like, in college and in grad school too, and especially and depending on like what field you're going into. Like, I wish I had learned about that too. Like, be prepared if you're going into something that requires a lot of like empathy. Like, you need to be prepared for this. I mean, I know my job sometimes it can be very emotional, and like a lot of stress about like real human suffering. It can be really intense. So and I sometimes really feel the stress from that, and it can take a toll.
And again, like as we were saying with ketamine as a treatment for depression, like it's a matter of expectations. If you expect things to change around 29 or 32 or whatever it is, and you're looking out for it, it won't catch you by surprise. It won't feel scary when it happens.
That's good to know.
So
okay, well, I'm about to have a big birthday later this summer, so I'll be thinking about that.
Really? Happy birthday in advance.
Thanks. That's still almost 2 months away, but something to think about.
Well, we'll ramp up to it.
Exactly.
We got time.
No, I won't be thinking about it like in an all or nothing way at all. It's not like, oh, well, when I have this big birthday, this is how I'm going to feel.
Everything will be different.
Definitely not going to catastrophize it either.
I did that when I was turning 5 years old. I woke up early in the morning, went to the bathroom, got naked, stood in front of the mirror, and started to cry. My mom came in like, honey, what's wrong? And I told her, I don't look fine.
Poor thing. Oh,
Yeah,
man.
and she was like, that's not how
it works.
That's actually a perfect example of all or nothing.
Yeah. Oh, you were kind of anxious as a little kid.
I thought I was going to be a big kid.
Yeah. And you're like, I'm just little Molly.
I'm just the same old me.
Poor little thing.
Anyway, all right. Thank you, Lynn.
All right. Thanks, Molly. See ya.
Where is the record button? There it is. That was episode 8, the final episode of our first season here at Ketamine Insights. Thank you so much for joining us. Making this podcast was a really big undertaking. My stamina and mental capacities are not what they once were. And that's something I still really, really struggle with, which made making this podcast a real challenge, both logistically and emotionally. So I just want to spend a moment to thank all of the listeners who rated the show or sent in encouragement and positive feedback over the last 2 months. It's been really helpful getting that feedback from you. I also want to send out thanks to all of our patrons at patreon.com/ketamine insights. You've made this show possible. If you're a regular listener, please head over there and help us out. We really appreciate it. Season 2 is coming, so we are currently surveying Patreon subscribers and collecting suggestions for episode topics. Email us with suggestions or with anything at all at ketamineinsights@gmail.com. 2 last things. I want to say to Lynn that working with you has been an absolute joy. I'm really, really deeply grateful for your generosity and your curiosity and your unwavering support as a host, but especially as a friend. And finally, my boyfriend, Demond, thank you. Thank you for your enthusiasm for my projects. Without you, this podcast absolutely never, ever would have been made. There's no question in my mind about that. And thank you for caring for me and for making me better and for making me laugh. You are a joy and a relief, and you inspire me to rest and heal and to relish life. And I love you.
She's sometimes sad, she's sometimes happy. She's doing things to make her life less crappy. Trying a treatment that's new on the scene. Let's sit back